Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. And today I'm hanging out with Nick Laundry, a RPG freelancer, and hopefully I didn't butcher your last name. Usually I try and ask beforehand.
It's Landry, actually.
Landry.
Yeah, there's no
So yeah, I
you.
tried putting that French spin on it for you, but yeah, it just failed. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing good. Thanks a lot for having me. It's great to meet you virtually like this. Like we were saying earlier, that's pretty much how everybody meets these days, right? You can't meet
Yeah,
anybody new face to face, even though we're not too far from each other.
yeah, and that's funny. There's been a bunch of times where I've done these live chats and someone will say something, and I'm like, wait a minute, where are you at? And it's like they're like two towns over or something like that, and it's like, oh, that's odd. I just could have came over and we could have did this in person. Not so much nowadays, but in the
Well,
before
tell you what,
times.
when this is all over, when I have something more exciting to talk about again, hopefully I can go do this live and I'll go meet you in your studio.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Studio is Ted's basement. So uh
Everybody has a different definition of their studio, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
all
So
good.
you're a freelancer over at done some work for Kobold, and you're gonna dipping your toes into the world of publishing as well.
Yeah, pretty much. So I think what brought me here was basically you had Megan from Kobold Press on the show recently, and basically through introductions and everything, here I am because of some of the work that I've done for Kobold Press. So I started. I'm kind of like of a baby kobold. I'm not. I
Yeah,
can't really consider myself like full kobold. I don't know. It's up to Wolfgang. He's the one who knights the kobolds, I think. So, and I've done some work mostly for their blog, but then some of my work is actually coming into a publication, a PDF that's part of a stretch goal that's coming soon with Scarlet Citadel.
yeah. So I mean, we were kind of talking a little bit before we got started, and like you have a day job like most people in this industry,
Yeah.
and you're just getting started. And you're like, I don't even feel like this is work when I talk about it because it's fun stuff.
It
Um,
is. It is fun until you get a deadline. When you
yeah,
get a deadline, that's when it becomes something else.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. Oh, and
it's
also when you get the cash checks, like that makes it a bit more real as well.
it is. I mean, yeah. When I got my very first payment, I was like, "Wow, I'm a professional tabletop game designer now. This
Yeah,
is
no
this
going
is
back.
cool."
So,
After all these books that I've been collecting for years now, finally, some money is coming in.
how did you get connected with Kobold?
Oh, interesting. Well, first of all, I'm a fan, of course. That's the first thing. I mean, for me, as a D&D player, I've dabbled in a bunch of settings, but Midgard is by far my favorite setting. I discovered pretty much like I got the ability to play in Midgard first as a player through an online group called midgardadventurers.org. So it's kind of like organized play, but it's not by Kobold Press. It's more like it's organized by fans. So Michael Turbay is actually the creator of this group, and it's been passed on to other people now. And I landed there when I was looking for opportunities to play because I basically left the hobby for 17 years and ended up like looking online, like how can I play more? How can I play more? I have to catch up for lost times, Found this group, ended up playing there, just dove deeper into Midgard. I just loved it. And then at some point, there's a bit of a connecting tissue here. At some point, I decided I want to play a geomancer, which is one of the subclasses from the Midgard Heroes Handbook. And I was reading about geomancy in a school, and it's all connected to ley lines. And ley lines are basically the kind of like the magical lifeblood of the land of Midgard. And I thought this is such a cool concept. And I started reading more about it, but then I was like, I need more. I had so many questions. I actually tracked down Dan Dillon, who now works for Wizards of the Coast, and asked him a whole bunch of questions about ley lines because he was the one that adapted ley lines for fifth edition from Pathfinder. He and then after that, after I basically got all my answers from him, I went to Kobold Press and I said, by the way, I've got all this great info here. How about like an FAQ about ley lines? So that was my first official blog post. It was more of a favor like this. Hey, here you go. If you want to publish this, that'd be great. So they accepted to publish it. But then I kept working on geomancy because as a GM, you're never satisfied with what's there. You keep digging deeper. And I was like, we need more geomancy spells. And how do you locate the ley lines? There were no rules for this. It was all up to the GM, basically. So I started designing my own systems and pretty much like wrote a lot of it on my own for my own game because I was going to publish. I was preparing for my own campaign as a GM for Midgard with my D&D group. Then I went to Gen Con last year, met Megan there, and I showed her all the stuff that I had written so far, and I was like, "Hey, by the way, would you guys be interested in something like this?" And she tells me, "Well, you'd have to reach out to Wolfgang and Scott, and maybe it looks cool." And shortly after that, they announced the Deep Magic Kickstarter. I don't know if you remember, like the big book of spells. It's over 600 spells and everything. And I thought this is perfect because ley lines, there's so many spells. I figured if I have new spells, maybe I can pitch it to them. So I emailed Wolfgang and Scott and told them like, hey, would you be interested in new ley line spells and new ley line stuff? That would be great for Deep Magic. It turns out that Deep Magic was meant to be more of a system agnostic set of spells. They didn't want it. I mean, while there is some Midgard stuff in there, they didn't want it to be too Midgard related. But they said, hey, that'd be great for the blog. So they basically opened the door for me and they said, if you want to write for our blog, we can compile it later. So that's how I basically started writing for the Kobold Press blog, which I invite everybody to go check it out. There's a lot of great content and great authors there. And then lately with the Scarlet Citadel, they announced a stretch goal. And one of the stretch goals is the Midgard Magic Ley Lines supplement, which is going to take all of the existing ley line stuff that was in the books that was kind of scattered about, plus the new blog content that I wrote, and it's all going to come together in a new supplement that's going to come at some point. So
nice.
It's a long story, but that's how it happened.
Well, no, like, and it doesn't actually like there's actually like some great nuggets of advice in there if people are paying attention. And like, if you want to break into a new field or a new endeavor, sometimes working for free is a great way to do it. And I know many people are very adverse to that. But sometimes you have to prove yourself first.
Well,
and then
to be fair to Kobold Press, first of all, I did not work for free. Kobold Press pays their authors, and I basically the very first FAQ that I did, it was just something that I did quickly, so I gave it to them, and I think they gave me store credits or something. But the bottom line is for the actual series on ley lines, that was an actual publishing contract, so for the blog. And,
but it sounds like you didn't know that going in. Like, it sounds like you presented, you did the work already, and you didn't know if you were going to reap the benefits for that.
Right. It was. I mean, come on. What GM doesn't put in a lot of work already into their stuff?
No,
I mean,
true.
we homebrew things. We homebrew new classes, new spells. We write new. We create maps. We basically create whole adventures. Maybe they're not like fully published, but I was kind of hoping to get into that. So when I was writing my spells, I took great care to craft the language 5e style. Like the 5th edition language, the way spells are written is not accidental. It's not random.
Yeah.
You can quickly tell the difference when you look at homebrew content. You can quickly tell the difference between someone who just winged a new spell or a new ability versus someone who's carefully studying the language of the 5th edition team and using the same words. Because, for example, if you just look at things like Sage Advice with Jeremy Crawford, the language in 5th edition is so important. One word can completely change if something is generic or specific. So I think that's another great piece of advice there. If you want to write for a game, learn the language of that game, not just the rules. Learn how they write.
Yeah, 5e is very specific like that. And I think for years after playing it, like, things like that would come up and you would see it, how it's presented. Luckily for us, our content director is really good at knowing how all that fits together. So we can write garbage on a page and then he makes it work.
Oh yeah, and of course that's where editors come in. Of course, like Scott Gable and
Megan.
And Megan and there's a whole bunch of editors as well. And I also from my own project, I mean, they take the stuff that you that you write, and then they turn it into something so much better. So and you think you write well sometimes, and then you see it after, you go like, whoa, okay, no, I guess I needed the lesson in humility there. So
They are the unsung heroes for sure.
oh, totally, yeah. I think that's like what Megan said, is that if their job is done well, you don't see it, right?
Yeah.
You don't notice it. But people that know, of course, we see it. It's definitely there.
It's it's kind of like the same for like all editing is kind of like that, right? It's you only know when it's bad. You rarely know when it's good.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's the I mean, I work in software development, so people notice the bugs, not the good features sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So the testers are the unsung heroes, because if they miss a bug, then of course we know.
So, what got you back into the game? I mean, we've been doing this for like 6 years now, and we hear that a lot. Like older gamers coming back to the hobby. Yeah, I've been out for 10, 20, 30 years. I decided to do it again.
Yeah, in my case, it was, the classic, like life got in the way. Back then I started with like a original D&D orange box and blue box, like basic and expert set in French, mind you,
Yeah,
and then got into D&D first edition and second edition. Dabbled into other games like Star Wars West End games, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay first edition, and a bunch of other games, and played for 16 years. I think I stopped around 2001. And at this point, I was basically, I was in my 20s. People were getting married. People were getting busy. Work, everybody's careers were taking off. It was getting harder and harder to get together, because we were always playing in person back then. There was no such thing as online play. And I don't know, we just fizzled out. And then a few years later, I moved to the US and from Canada. And so I lost touch with my party. And then I was building a new life. I was
yeah.
living in Manhattan. I was going out. I was trying to live life more, if you will, outside. Not that gaming is not living life, but I was experimenting with like experiencing more of the this new country that I just moved to. And then a few months later, I met my wife, and then next thing you know, we got engaged, moved in, got married, and kids. So yeah, everything got in the way, in between careers and travel and everything. And then what got me back, honestly, um, I had been buying a few books here and there. Like I bought some third edition books, like the player's handbook, DM guide. Never played it. Um, I was already buying games on Humble Bundle, so sometimes they would have like a Pathfinder deal, and I started buying all the Pathfinder PDFs this way. So I was like, you know what, this looks interesting. And honestly, if I remember correctly, oh yeah, I started working on a video game basically, because I'm as a software engineer, I also specialize in virtual reality and spatial computing and HoloLens and mixed reality and all of that. So my main tool is Unity, which is a game engine. And I was working on a video game. That's still in development right now. It's kind of a project on one of my side projects on a hiatus, and it's an RPG. It's a first-person roguelike RPG, um, and it's all in 3D. But I wanted to use dungeon generation, and then I needed, of course, an RPG rule set under the hood. So I
Yeah,
started doing more research. While I was doing research, I stumbled upon this little show called Critical Role, I think,
yeah,
and started watching that, and I was like, man, I gotta play again.
yeah.
so so yeah, I was watching this, and it was a very different kind of a game than how I used to play, of course, with my friends back in the 80s and the 90s. um, I had also matured as an adult, as a father, as a husband. So I perceive the game very differently after this. Like I used to play like power gaming. I'm gonna make a fighter priest Dwerger. I'm gonna find a way to cobble him, into the group because all the abilities were cool. And now after watching Sam Riegel, I was like, I want to play a bard. That looks cool. That's what I want. I want to play a bard. And in one of my campaigns with my friends, actually, my favorite character is a College of Lore bard. So it's and I have this group of friends that I met through conferences, that I learned at some point that they had a D&D game going, and I went to lunch with one of them, my friend Dex, and I said, you gotta get me in, please get me back into D&D. I want in. So I started hanging out with them. We're all busy dads, all with one token single friend, and we're basically all meeting online. Even before the pandemic, we would just meet online because it's easier this way. Everybody's got kids. Everybody in the middle of a game can get interrupted by a kid or another or something on Friday nights.
Your
And
volume just dropped
oh,
significantly.
really? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but it just got lower for some reason.
Really? I haven't touched
It's
anything.
fine now.
So it's fine now.
Yeah,
Okay,
that
all
was
right.
weird.
Okay, that's odd. Anyway, so I go into long rambles. I'm sorry, but bottom line is I started playing with these guys every Friday night, and then experimenting with games, and then I just went all in. I wanted to make up for lost time, so I started playing with Starfinder Society online, and then D&D Adventurers League, and then I went to Gen Con and PAX Unplugged, and I played more games there. And I basically was trying to get into as many games as I could during this time to kind of make up for it. So yeah, in a nutshell, both my research for my video game brought me to Critical Role, and then that's how I decided to get back in.
And now you'll never have enough time to finish that video game.
No, no, that's the thing.
So,
It's the plight of the side projects. Like any good designer, you have a million side projects, and then you try to finish one. Which is why right now I kind of formalized one when Zine Quest was announced earlier this year. I had this idea because I started playing Hero Quest with my kids back in January, and then I was going through this and I was like, this is cool, but I want sci-fi. You know, I love sci-fi, so I decided to make a sci-fi game for kids, and got it kickstarted via Zine Quest, and it was successful, even with some stretch goals. And now I've been working on this. It's kind of late right now. The pandemic, let's just say, threw a big wrench in
yeah.
my plans, in my free time, in my availability, in my emotional state, and everything. But it's progressing right now. So
Do your kids play games?
they do now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I see sometimes parents trying to force things onto their kids. And I think the best way to get a kid into your world is to share your world with them. Don't force it into them. Just show them how passionate you are about it. So my friends would, my kids would see me, for example, prep for D&D night every Friday night, and they know it's my sacred night. Nobody touches that, you know. So it's like, go to bed. It's my D&D night, you know.
Yeah.
And they would see me, and they see all these books that I have around me and everything, and all. And then I started buying board games as well. It's a great gateway to for kids for games. So yeah, so then I got them into it, and then I started playing Hero Kids with them, and then they, as soon as we were done, I mean, we played for hours. Imagine they were 6 years old, and we
Yeah.
played for hours for a starter adventure. And then after that, I started my game, and then they were the first playtesters of my game, and yeah, they love it now, and they just want to play more. So
Nice. So Brian wants to know, how does a Frenchman pronounce Belay?
how do you pronounce what?
Belay?
How do you spell that?
Bullette.
Oh, a
Monster?
bullet.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, TTE. It's bullet. I
Bulette.
guess I would say. I would
Yeah,
say
I
it's
call them
bullet.
Belay. I don't know if that's right or not. I'd have to go to
But is
D&D
it
Beyond.
ET or TTE? I don't have the chat up with me right now.
TTE.
Yeah, if it's TTE, it's bullet. Because
So,
boulet would be just ET.
yeah.
And a consonant at the end of a word in French is almost always silent. But if you put an E afterwards, then you have to pronounce the consonant. So for example, if you
Like
say
my last
boulet,
name, for example.
yeah, exactly. Your last name in the French is Friand.
Ah,
The
yeah.
A-N is the sound. You don't say the N, it's en. And
Yeah.
then the T is silent. So it's Friand.
Yeah. And then we Americanized it with Friant.
Friand. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so and my brother switched it back to saying it the kind of the French way because he's an artist. We were talking about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I made
It's
fun of him. Because we're brothers, that's what we do. Yeah, so that's cool. So you had the built-in play testers. Do you want to tell us about the game a little bit?
yeah, of course. It's so it's essentially it's called Space Kids RPG, and it is a game that is designed for a pretty wide range of ages. I'm trying to design it for all as low as 4 years old, all the way to 12. The reason for the cutoff at 12 is because D&D is officially recommended for 13 and up, even though there's
Uh-huh.
kids that start younger than that. So the goal, of course, is to. I was looking at the world of sci-fi, and sci-fi is very mature now. Like we have things like Battlestar Galactica we had, and
Mm.
then The Expanse, and even the new Star Wars shows like The Mandalorian is not necessarily for kids, right?
Yeah.
And younger audiences seem to be introduced more to fantasy than sci-fi. I mean, I grew up with Star Trek and all the old, and of course Star Wars. And the old shows, I think sci-fi is kind of like losing steam compared to other genres. Like now, I think superheroes have also taken over completely. So I wanted to introduce kids to sci-fi. At the same time, I believe in science. I believe in education. And I think a belief in science is needed more than ever nowadays. I think to understand how science works, and that science is not something that you believe in or not. It's there. It's how it works. So I wanted to teach kids to make it educational. So I basically created Space Kids RPG as a game where you learn to play and you play to learn as well at the same time. So younger kids will learn to read and write more, simple numbers and counting, basic math and probability, and then of course teaching them about astronomy and space and science, technology. There's even some snippets of information in the adventures, like for example, when they're landing on a planet, then they're going to crash land because of gravity, and then there's the notion of sounds in space and orbits, and why some planets have atmospheres and others don't. I even have a science advisor on this who's actually writing those snippets, because I figured I can write this stuff, but
Yeah.
I would rather have someone who's a real like astronomy advisor. So I have Tom Stevens, who's actually a PhD in astronomy, who works for NASA, who's actually an author for these science snippets on the game.
And,
And
and how did you find Tom?
because he's a gamer as well. So
Yeah.
as I was exploring the world of RPGs again, I was reconnecting with some old roots. So you remember Star Frontiers?
Hmm.
So Star Frontiers was a game that I loved in the 80s, and I think it's a game that just had an unfortunate ending due to all the internal politics at TSR, as we know. And Zeb Cook, of course, amazing designer. Had a chance to chat with him about it a little bit as well. And I was essentially researching Star Frontiers, and I discovered that, oh, you can buy the PDFs now. And then there's even like a whole community of people that have kept the game alive all these years with supplements and everything. So there's a magazine called Star Frontiers Man, and there's another one called Frontier Explorer. And Frontier Explorer was actually created by Tom Stevens, and he's so that's how I ended up like connecting with him on Discord and everything. And then I learned that he was an actual like NASA contractor and astronomy PhD and everything. So that we kind of built an online friendship like this. And then when I was working on this project, I asked him, I said, "Hey, would you be interested in writing a few like science and astronomy snippets for kids?" He's a father himself. He has something like I think 6 or 7 kids, and yeah, so he accepted. That's how I found him. And then after that, I also through it all, I started writing. This is the free part. I started even writing some free articles for Frontier Explorer magazine that are on Drive Through RPG right now.
Yeah. So I'm looking now, and like there's tons of that old stuff that you can just download. And I was like
Oh, and
aware of it.
let
Um
me let me get something here. Actually, I should have pulled this before. This
yeah.
is great. Um, This is great streaming, of course, when you get up and you leave the screen blank. But
Yes, perfect.
I have so many bookshelves.
You know,
So for
third edition Gamma World is like one of my favorite covers. It's
yeah,
like
so
because he's riding that like
oh yeah,
cybernetic,
of course, yeah.
beast.
So this is an example, for example, of Frontier Explorer. So you got this great magazine. You can even get it in print if you want, via print on demand. It's
Yeah.
beautifully done. If you recognize this cover, it's basically an homage to the original cover from Star Frontiers, but this time it's the Sathars that are crash landed on a planet. with a ship in the background. So it's a great magazine, beautifully laid out. Lots of fun articles. So I wrote a couple of articles for this. Again, when I'm done with my Kickstarter, I'm going to write more stuff for it. I'm probably even going to publish some Space Kid, like free Space Kids RPG supplements, maybe for the magazine as well, because it's mainly about Star Frontiers, but it also covers
Yeah.
other games like Frontier Space, which is kind of a derivative of Star Frontiers. And I am working on my own. That's another game I'm working on. I have a lot of side projects called Star Pioneers, and it's my own take on Star Frontiers. It's like a new version of Star Frontiers, if you will, with my own setting. And in fact, Space Kids and Star Pioneers are set in the same universe. One is for adult gamers, and the other one is for kids. So,
I'm
and
afraid I might go broke now because now you've got me over here looking at all the old books and I'm like, oh, print on demand.
yes, oh, and they're beautiful. Actually, they've done a great job with they
Yeah,
scanned the originals. I have my original Star Frontiers books from the 80s, but
yeah.
I actually ordered the two print on demand from Alpha Dawn and Nighthawks, and also all of the modules. I bought a whole bunch of them on print on demand, and get like the premium quality one, like premium color quality and everything. It's so worth it. It's beautifully done, and definitely recommend it. And there's a lot of good games out there. So that's how I ended up meeting Tom, thanks to the Star Frontiers community. I even played Star Frontiers with my D&D group a few games last year as well. We basically jump started a Star Frontiers campaign. My own game, Star Pioneers, which
Yeah.
is still in development here. I did a play test of it last year as well. So I'm kind of all over the place with all these different things, and then eventually something gets published, and then I go work on other things. Because of the regular job, I have less pressures to publish as much, so I'm more picky on what makes it out, and it's also a question of time. So
Makes
and
that makes sense.
yeah, and Space Kids, it's already in playtest right now. There's a quick start that I published last May for my players. So as soon as the game publishes, hopefully early in the year, I have a quick start that's going to be free that anybody can just download, and it includes basically the adventure and a digest of the rules together in one PDF, so that you can kind of like play and learn how to play as you play it. But then there's also the player's guide and the adventure guide. It's like the player's guide has already been distributed to backers back in September, and I'm now working on the adventure guide, which is kind of like a combination of the game master's guide plus an adventure together with an alien compendium of monsters. So that's what I'm working on right now.
So I feel like for maybe me and you, like sci-fi was more prevalent because, we had shows like Buck Rogers, Battlestar Galactica, the old one, not not the new.
V for Victory as well. If you remember that, the aliens that ate
Yeah, oh yeah,
hamsters and
yeah.
everything.
In the
I
'80s,
always
yeah,
that scene is just seared into my brain. So, and yeah, with sci-fi and of course Star Wars. I mean, come on,
yeah,
we grew up
yeah.
with
Star Wars and
this.
Star Trek, but like,
Yeah,
I mean, these were like shows that came on at night, and you would watch, and there was no video on demand either, right? So like, and you
yeah.
had to wait, however long for the next episode.
Yep. Or you had to wait 3 years for a new Star Wars movie, and there was nothing
Yeah,
else in between.
yeah.
I've introduced my kids to Star Wars, and I keep telling them, like, you guys are so lucky. We have so many movies right now. I actually introduced them to Star Wars via the animated series, like Rebels show.
Okay.
So and then later we started watching the movies. So episodes 4, 5, 6 so far. That's all they've seen in terms of movies, and the rest they've seen like almost 4 seasons of Rebels. So they know characters like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Princess Leia, but they're much like my daughter's favorite character is Ahsoka and Hera and Sabine, and
Yeah.
uh, and then there's Ezra and Kanan. So it's
Well,
very
they're
different,
actually better characters too, right? Like
Oh, they're
because
fun. Yeah.
they're modernly written, so they're just better characters.
Yeah, I was. It's funny because just 2 weeks ago I was watching Return of a Jedi with my kids, and I was like, this is painful. I mean, yeah, it's Star Wars. Yes, it's magical, it's fun and everything, but some of the dialogue and the acting was kind of
Yeah.
like, and Return Jedi it's a decent movie, but it's not the best. And then looking at the special effects of the speeder bike chase, I was like, okay, this is not as good as I remember it. I mean,
It's
at the
never
time,
as
it
good as
was
you remember it.
yeah, at the time it was phenomenal, but now I've seen so many like behind the scenes making of Star Wars over the years, that I
Yeah.
know which part is actually a miniature and what's actually green screen work and everything. So I can see through this. And I have 3 startups under my belt, and one of my startups was actually in the movie industry working on visual effects. So I see a lot of these things more now. So
Yeah. Going backwards is always so hard. Like, I think Ted tried introducing his kids to things like Transformers and stuff like that, and like that was like the pinnacle of cartoons back in the day. But he's like, oh, it's so terrible now.
yes. Although, although my kids love Bugs Bunny,
Yeah.
unfortunately, some of those clips have not aged well because of some of the
No, no, not at
stereotypes of the
all.
time. So let's just say that I've put some disclaimers, to kind of like retcon some of the bad stuff, and I've tried
I
to
think they
filter
put
some
the
of that.
disclaimers in there now as well. Like
Yeah, actually, they
that
have
stuff.
Whoopi Goldberg coming in and giving a whole, like on the DVD set, like explaining how, yeah, it's a product of its time. Take it for
Yeah.
what it is. But at least, like the silly cartoon violence is, at least that part I can live with. It's fine, So it is what it is. You
We
can't
grew up
ignore.
fine, right?
Exactly. We can't ignore history, and as long as we're better people now and understand what was wrong and embrace it and realize it, then it's fine.
The I think I tried making my kids watch Thundar the Barbarian, and we did not get very far into that before my kids are like, "This is terrible." And it's funny, like they call everything graphics, right? Like they don't,
Oh yeah,
no, they
like
don't.
video games, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's, I mean, my kids, like my son was like almost an adult at that point, like. And he's still calling things graphics instead of special effects or animations. It's like, these graphics are terrible. I'm like, you don't understand. I had to wait all week to watch this. And god damn it, if the stupid president was on the TV on a Saturday, you were screwed. Because that was your day to watch cartoons.
Yeah, you couldn't record it. There was no on demand behind the scenes. There was no streaming or anything. So yeah, it was different. Like you said, sci-fi was very different for us back then. So I think that's why we were more
Yeah.
introduced to it. So that's why it was important for me
And your
to try
volume
to
dropped again.
introduce. Yeah, to kind of. Oh, really? Can you hear me now?
That's weird the way it'll
And
just
now you
randomly drop in and out.
anything. I'll have to ask my buddies because I use the same microphone, like headset, for my D&D game, and I'll have to ask them tonight when I play.
You're just gonna have to
So,
shout, man.
is it okay now?
No, it's super low.
It's super low. Okay. One, two,
Yeah.
testing. Yeah,
Even
this is
even
great TV,
on
folks. I'm
even
not.
on my meter here, you're coming in low.
Okay, one, two, testing. Hopefully it comes back at some point. I don't know what's going on. I have nothing running in the background. Um, testing things. I don't know. Let me see my microphone settings, what it says. Sound settings. Test your microphone. Yeah, my microphone input seems fine. I don't know if it's internet related. How is it now?
It's yeah, it's
Is it
still
back?
low.
It's still low.
Now it just got a little better.
It's getting a little better. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but is it manageable? Can I keep talking or?
Yeah, when it's like that, you can. Yeah,
Okay, all right, cool. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on.
and then it just came up
So,
even higher
oh,
now. So
yeah.
I don't
Oh,
know.
actually, you're right. I can see a difference here for some reason.
Oh,
Must be the headset. So, okay. So yeah, so as I was saying, I wanted to introduce sci-fi to my kids, so that's why I'm building this game. One thing that I'm trying to do different with it is, given the wide age range, I wanted a game that was not going to be, because if you create something that's simple enough for 4 years old, 10 to 12 years old are going to be very bored with it. And if it's good for the 10 to 12-year-olds, it's going to be too complex for the younger ones. So I created a scalable system. I call it Glory. It stands for Gradual Learning Open Rules for Younglings. And Glory is essentially a system that works in 4 tiers. So like 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10, and 10 to 12. The base rules of the game as they stand are basically for all of the tiers. And then I have callouts in the book where I say, hey, when you play at tier 2, so for example, 6 to 8, consider introducing this rule here. So for example, it could be a rule like critical hits, like or it could be a rule like items. If I look at items in the game, For tier 1, items are just flavor. They're just part of the story. Tier 2, you can start introducing some of the abilities that items do. Hey, you get a bonus on this die if you do this. Tier 3, now you can start introducing like not only the rules, but hey, let's manage your items a little bit more so that you can't, for example, the slots, like you can't wear 2 things on your back or things like that. And then at the higher tier, now the items even have, for example, a power rating associated with them. And now with the GM can then start using the power rating of your group to balance things out for you. So I'm introducing all these rules in there so that you can have a gradual game where you can start young, and then when your kids are more familiar with it, you can then say, hey, let's start introducing this rule now. Instead of forcing the GM to take an entire rule set and pick it apart, I prefer to introduce something where there's the base rule set, and then you can start adding components that are already called out. And hopefully with playtesting, people will be able to tell me like, hey, we feel like this rule, you know what, maybe it's too old or it's too young for it, so you can adjust it.
Well, so the whole game kind of scales to the complexity that you need or want.
That's the goal, yeah. And by baking it in, I can also make callouts, for example, to how creatures are created. I'm also going to have some creatures that will have a rating as well. So for example, with the art, some might be a little scarier than others. So kind of saying like, hey, this is maybe a creature that because of its special abilities or something, don't introduce it to your 4-year-old, maybe save that for the older kids. So that's I looked around. I haven't seen anybody doing this kind of scalable rule set like this in a kids game. I've tried a lot of different game for kids, so either played or read them, and there's a lot of excellent ones out there. Like as I said, Hero Kids is awesome. No Thank You Evil with Monte Cook Games also excellent. Amazing Tales, and there's a bunch of others, Starport and others. But they're all kind of set into like kind of an age range, and some might feel too young, some might feel too old. I wanted to find something that would be a little bit more scalable.
It's definitely an interesting way to go about it. I was going to ask you about No Thank You Evil. I know Ted, that's what he kind of started his kids with. And there's some great techniques in there for little kids. But, like you said, after a while, kids are going to age out of that.
Right. I mean, it's a beautiful game. The art is amazing. I mean, the designers at Monaco Games are amazing. Shana Germain has done great work with No Thank You Evil. But I think, I mean, they say like it's from 5 and up to any whatever you want. Yeah. I do think it's definitely more geared towards younger kids though. So like I still have not played it with my kids, and I know they've been waiting for it. I've just been busy with stuff, so I will. My kids are 7 now, so it's going to be a good test, I think, to see how they respond to this game at 7, or if they feel like it's too simple or not. But I think, to be honest, though, the storytelling is definitely going to take over, because if there's one thing that Monaco does is like spark the imagination. They're very good at creating like imaginary worlds and new things, and really like fueling those creative juices, both in a GM but also in players. Like I play Numenera, and oh my god, if there's one game that is so far out of this world, it's Numenera. It's unbelievable, and it's gorgeous as well.
Yeah, so I've played some Cypher System, which is the system's based off of that.
Yep.
I haven't actually gotten a chance to really play Numenera yet, which I do like the concept of that world. And I even read I think it's called Poison Eater by Shannon Germain. It was one of the novels from it. So like I really enjoy the world there and the aesthetics. And the system's a great system as well. We're currently running a game that using that basically like loosely. It's like a science fantasy post-apocalyptic world based off of Thundar the Barbarian meets Flash Gordon with a touch of inspired by the year 2020 in there.
There's a great. Do you have the book "The Stars Are Fire" by Monaco Games?
I do have the PDF. I might even have the book. I have a stack of books over there. I'm terrible. Like I backed all these Kickstarters, but I never got my stuff. And then I went over to there one day, And I was like, I had all this stuff sitting there. I'm like, oh, maybe I should get it. And like two
Yeah.
big boxes of books show up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know the feeling. I have stacks and stacks of books. This is just one shelf behind me there. There's like another like double wide here, full of books. But Stars of
Yeah,
Fire is for Cypher System if you want to do sci-fi,
yeah,
and it's kind of adaptive. Like you can do space opera, you can do hard sci-fi, and it's a beautiful book as well. But honestly, Cypher is again a beautifully designed system. It's not crunchy enough for me though. I like crunch in my
yeah,
systems, and I'll say that when it comes to Numenera, I'm in love with a setting, but Cipher, I wish it had a little bit more crunch into it. I
yeah.
actually
I get that.
backed the Arcana of the Ancients, which is the adaptation of Numenera for 5e. Um, it's interesting. Unfortunately, it's a subset of Numenera, and I don't know that 5e was the best rule set for this. It's crunchier than Cypher, but unfortunately, for example, they made some design decisions to not introduce new subclasses in there.
Mhm.
They figured just use your standard subclasses, and we'll just give you new monsters and ciphers and everything. So again, it's going to require more work on the GM's part. I personally I would have loved to see subclasses go in there, and I had this Twitter debate. I think it was with Bruce Cordell about this. So it's always fun, we all
Yeah.
that's the curse of the designer, right? You love this and you would have done that differently and everything. But overall, Numenera is a work of genius.
What
It's
what system did you cut your teeth with?
um you mean back then or now?
Originally, when you started playing.
Oh, it was D&D Basic Expert, like
Yeah.
Mulvey, and then first edition, second edition. Those were the first ones. And then, as I said, I played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, Gamma World Third Edition, Star Frontiers, Star Wars D6, like West End Games, and then that was mostly it, I think, for
So
back
you
in the
skipped
80s.
third and fourth.
Yes, that's the thing. I
Yeah.
bought a few books, but I skipped third and fourth, then went to fifth,
Yeah.
which is great. I mean, again, I would have preferred a little bit more crunch, but at least to get back into it, it was easy. That was good. And of course, with things like D&D Beyond, it's oh my god, we're so spoiled.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot more crunch than second edition. Well, I mean, it depends, like, because you had all the optional rules
yes, I
that
mean,
made it
yeah,
very
if you
clunky.
compare just the player's handbook, that's one thing. But yeah, if you start adding like the all of those guides that came afterwards,
Yeah.
there was a lot of those. There was also a lot of fluff content that you did not necessarily read much. You had to sift through a lot to find like the new items and the new. There was a
Yeah.
lot
I
of
guess it
long
depends. Like,
exposition.
I don't know. I remember like tearing into all that stuff and reading all of it. Um,
But we had more time back then, right? We
well,
had
that's
more
true
time.
too.
There was no information overload of the internet. There was no like drive-through RPG or DM's Guild. You were getting your Dragon magazine and your Dungeon magazine every month. That was it.
I,
So of course we had time to pour through every word of everything. Now, like you said, we kickstart everything, boxes show up, and we're like, I don't have time for this now.
I know. Like, I hardly ever use anything new in D&D. Especially like there's a lot of really great third party publishers that we talk about, and I'm friends with, like Frog God Games, Nord Games, Kobold Press. They're all great. Kwood Publishing. I mean, there's actually way too many for me to even mention. But the truth of the matter is, if it's not in D&D Beyond, the likelihood of me using it isn't really good, or I'm just going to make up my own stuff on the fly. Uh, just because, like, when I run anymore, I hardly ever touch a book.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this because so I play a number of D&D campaigns. My group of dads I was talking about, we rotate as GMs. So we
Yeah,
basically all have our own campaigns. So depending on who's available, we say, hey, that night we're going to play that campaign, and each campaign has its own set of characters. So
yeah,
across my various campaigns, I play a druid, a bard, a blood hunter, and in one campaign we're in the realms. In another campaign, it's a homebrew by the DM.
yeah,
And then in my campaign that I GM is Midgard. So for that, since I'm a heavy user, we're all heavy users of D&D Beyond now. I've actually homebrewed everything in D&D Beyond, privately, of course,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's Kobold Press IP. But every single time I hand out a new item that comes from a Kobold Press book, to my players, I just say, like, go add it to D&D Beyond. It's there. I've homebrewed their races, like the Minotaur, the Rat Folk, the Gear Forged. And there's also a Werlion in the group. I've homebrewed the Oath of Radiance Paladin and the Geomancer Wizard. All the spells I wrote, I homebrewed all of that. I've become way too well versed now in homebrewing in D&D Beyond. But of
Yeah, yeah.
course, everything is checked private, because the cool thing is, by making it, it's a good system, because even though it's private, as long as they create characters in my campaign, they can see everything,
Yeah.
so it's a good way for me to share the content with them. And they've all bought the books, of course. I mean, before we started the campaign, I said, guys, Midgard Heroes Handbook, go buy this, you need it. A bunch of them bought the world book as well. So yeah, so I've been pushing the Kobold Press, like, left and right, like crazy. So I love this world. That's the thing. I don't love it because I write for Kobold. I write for Kobold because I love Midgard. That's the truth of it.
You're a fan first. Yeah.
I'm a
Uh,
fan first, definitely. And now I can't. It's kind of hard for me to go back to a regular, I would say, vanilla D and
uh,
D game, because I miss my spells. All my extension of spells. Like, we've even had the error sometimes where, in one campaign, for example, when character shows up and goes like, "Oh, I picked up this spell, but my character, I'm going to cast this," and I'm like, um, "That's a Midgard spell. You're not supposed to use it in the realms. So unless that GM allows you to use
yeah,
it."
yeah.
Like, in my campaign, you can, but in that campaign, you're technically not supposed to, because it shows up on their D&D Beyond stuff, because I homebrewed it all, right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, "Oh, damn, it's so good. I wanted to use it." And then the other GM is like, "No, no, no Midgard stuff in this campaign." So it's been interesting.
That is funny. So Brian had a question a while
Yes.
back that I'm going to circle back to. How did you deal with character death as a mechanic? I imagine it would be very different between the youngest age range and the oldest for your game.
Okay, so in Space Kids, yes, that's a good question. First of all, when it comes to, there's no violence in the game. So there's combat, but there's no lethal violence. So everything in the description is meant to daze, bruise, stun, knock down, and things like that. There's no notion of killing. And at many parts of the game, I actually call out how that the word die or kill or anything should not come up. I also call out how characters are not supposed to instigate
please,
combat on their own. Yep.
please use boo boos instead of wounds.
Yeah, stuff like that. So, for example, the characters have a stamina rating,
Yeah.
and the stamina is what they lose. So when they drop to 0 stamina, um, it simply means they're too tired to fight now.
Yeah.
They get knocked down, and they're too tired to fight, and they can't talk, they can't move, and somebody's gonna have to come and give them care. There's a medic skill in there, so characters can come and heal them. Um, and then when you defeat an enemy, you don't kill them, you defeat them, then narratively the GM is supposed to say either they get knocked down, they fall unconscious, or they run away. And while the space pirates run away, they drop items behind them to
Uh,
run faster. So that's how you get your loot. So
yeah.
it's everything is built like this. I also designed another system called it's funny because the term just came out like that when I was during the Kickstarter, when I was blogging about it. It's called VCR, Verbal Conflict Resolution, and the VCR is essentially a combat system with words. So it's kind of inspired a little bit from the old what do you call it, like challenges in fourth edition, where you like multiple skill sets with a
Oh
number of
yeah, skill
successes,
challenges. Yeah.
skill challenges. And the idea is you use the same rules as combat. So there's going to be like a back and forth, and then one character for the group is going to make an argument, and I encourage them to role play it. But then they're going to use their mind skill, which is kind of like a merger of wisdom, intelligence, and charisma all together. There's only 3 stats in the game. There's basically strength, agility, and mind. And they're using their mind skill to make rolls, to make basically combat rolls, and it's opposed rolls that the system uses. And if you win, then you win an argument against someone, you win a point. And then for each encounter, for example, it would say, well, to accomplish this task, you will need to basically get 3 wins against them. And then there's special abilities that can even help you in VCR encounters. So it's to teach kids that sometimes it's better to use words instead of using violence to resolve something.
Yeah.
Some animals will attack them because they're hungry or they're scared, but not because they're just vicious. So again, you knock them down, you defeat them, and if the kids go down themselves, then yeah, they just get too tired to fight. And if you have a TPK, then honestly, the way I call it is I'll usually introduce something like, this happens to save the kids. This thing happens, and you put a little bit of a consequence in there so that at least they feel like they should win, and they're not just going to win no matter what. And there's
Right.
actually consequences to their actions. So that's kind of how I deal with it in Space Kids.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can have negative outcomes without just murdering everybody, for sure.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, I've never been inspired to like make my own RPG until this moment. Because I need a game with a boo boo mechanic or the boo boo meter instead of health and stamina.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll send you the playtest for Space Kids, and you can take a look at it.
So what is the core mechanic? Like one of the things I love about No Thank You Evil is I thought it's genius the way they use the pools and the chits, because it's like even a child that doesn't really isn't really proficient in math yet can understand the growing and dwindling of piles of objects.
Right. So the way I've done it, so first of all, in terms of design philosophies, like there's games, for example, like Hero Kits that only use D6s because they're
Yeah.
readily available. But now, I mean, you can go online and you can buy a pack of 6 packs of dice for like $10. I mean, dice are pretty cheap to get now. They're very easy to come by, and people invest so much in their dice. I figured
Yeah.
as parents, you're going to want to share your dice with your kids and your love of dice. So I wanted to use the dice. So I used all of the dice except the D20, actually. I used the D4 to the D12. And the way it works is you've got 3 basic attributes. You've got strength, agility, and mind. And then instead of having a score, you have a die. So a starter character starts with a D4, a D6, and a D8. And then you simply assign it to one, either through a pre-made character that's done for you, or you assign it yourself. So you'll have to pick which one has the D8, which one has the D6, which one has the D4. Then you have basic skills. There's only a few skills like range tactics or melee tactics, which is combat.
Mhm.
And then there's social, and there's other skills like nature skills. And then when you make, for example, an attack roll, the other side also will have a defense die. A defense die is always going to be a D4, unless you're wearing special equipment that gives you a higher die. Or, for example, in the case of one species, which is Kritori, the Kritori is kind of like, think a centaur, but it's a lobster instead. So it's basically like the half body of a lobster, and the upper part is more humanoid. And they have a harder exoskeleton, so they start with a D8 actually for armor. So the dynamic is very simple. You basically roll. If I have a D6 in this, and I have a skill 1, and the other side has a defense die, which is a D4, I do a D6 plus 1 versus a D4. And if I roll equal to or higher, then I score a point. So it's basically based on opposed rolls instead of trying to hit a fixed AC. So it helps kids to do very basic math. The modifiers never get beyond +1 or +2.
Okay.
And it also helps them identify the dice, like the one that's shaped like a pyramid is a D4, and then the cube is the D6, and learning the different shapes like this.
That's
So
also that's a good simple mechanic as well, because it's easy for them to see the difference.
right, that's the whole point, is to keep it simple. The VCR system is the same. You're going to roll your mind versus the opponent's mind. It's going to be an opposed roll. If you can also introduce cool things like an upgrade die. Like, for example, if you have a talent, that talent says, for example, in certain situations, you get an upgraded die. And therefore, if you were going to roll a D6, now you're going to roll a D8. You have to go find the next one. If you get a penalty for something, it could be a downgraded die. So now you go maybe from a D8 to a D6, or a D6 to a D4. And downgrading a D4 is just going to be -1. So it's simple mechanics like this. It allows you to also do things like advantage as well. So Instead of rolling 1d6, you roll 2 and you use the best one of the 2, or disadvantage. So I love the ability to have upgraded, downgraded dice, advantage, disadvantage, and then modifiers, +1, -1, things like that. It
Now,
gives me a lot of flexibility.
uh, it's actually a lot of really cool design in there. I do want to ask you one non-related question before I forget about it. How do you say "stay nerdy" in French?
Stay nerdy?
Yeah.
Oh, so for example, if I remember, oh my God, what's the term?
Apparently, it's a tough phrase because I asked about saying it in Chinese, and that wasn't happening either.
I'm trying to remember the nerd. I have it on the tip of my tongue. How we say nerd. No, that's not it.
Is nerd a word in French? Is that a thing?
There's a word we were using, because I see here it's translating to ballot, but we don't use that term.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds. What was it in French? Was it tronche? I'm trying to remember, what is tronche again?
How long have you been here in the States?
16 years, so I'm kind of losing my vocabulary sometimes.
No.
I can still speak like without an accent whatsoever in French, but sometimes there's certain words that if you don't. But of course, even in French, it's the term nerd is not something that I would. I think it's. Let me see what tronche is.
When you were originally gaming, were you playing in French?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We my first books. Basic Expert and Star Frontiers were all in French, but then after that, for D&D First Edition and Star Wars, West End Games and Gamma World, BattleTech, MechWarrior, Warhammer, all of that was in English. So we would use the English rule books.
Yeah.
But the game itself was actually in French. So we would we're very used to throwing a lot of English words in there. So we could say, for example, like armor class, we could say classe d'armure, but for example, for hit points, we could either say sometimes hit points or point V. So it's one or the other. So we would just go and inject a lot of English words in our French stuff. So for the stay nerdy, I don't know. I'll have to find this one.
I know. We'll have to do a part 2 so we can find out. So
maybe I'll post it in the comments or something on the video, maybe, so people can. Canada, yeah, it's tronche. I was right. La revanche des tronches. So stay nerdy. There's no cool way of, because in English it's cool, right? You can say, hey, stay nerdy,
Yeah.
But if I was to translate it really and say like demeurer des tronches, no, it doesn't sound.
It doesn't roll the same way. Yeah.
It doesn't roll at all. No, I'll have to find you a better translation that would equally be fun and cool. So.
A couple of years ago, I did D&D in the castle, and the first one they did was in France.
Oh, I would love that.
It was pretty cool. Although, I will say the French people are not very helpful or sympathetic towards someone who does not speak French.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I've gotten that feedback from a lot of people sometimes, is because they're kind of very set in their ways sometimes and how things are done and everything. So if you go to Paris and you start asking for your American things, you will hear things like, no, sir, you cannot get the ketchup with the chicken.
Because I got lost, right? So I kind of got lost and almost got arrested in France.
Oh, wow.
So like I had to take a train to where I was going. And, they have these trains and they're like double deckers and they're like just like packed with people. And and you have the PA system, which is terrible. It's like an airport PA system, essentially, right? Where you have no idea what they're actually saying. But as someone who doesn't speak French and you're listening for words in another language, I totally missed my stop. And even I was trying to ask people how to get to a place and I was mispronouncing it because I'm just reading it. And then eventually someone was helpful enough where I was like, I showed them, and they're like, "Oh, you need to do this."
Yeah.
Um, but so like I missed my stop. I ended up at the wrong place, but there was a connecting train, and the train had just rolled up as I got there. So I like just jumped on, like literally the doors had shut. I
Oh,
hit the button and they opened, so I jumped on the train. But
you're
what
not
I
supposed to do
didn't
that.
do
Yeah.
was get another ticket.
Oh,
I was like in panic mode, and it was like late. And eventually the ticket taker came around, and he's like, this isn't the right ticket. I'm like, yeah, I kind of got lost. And they're like, well, don't do it again. And I was like, perfect, because I probably won't be here again. So
yeah. I get good treatment over there. I mean,
yeah,
it's they can immediately detect my Quebec accent when I speak in French, and they somehow love their distant cousins from North America. You know, this little
yeah.
pocket of French surrounded by English provinces and countries.
They feel
So
sympathy
it's
for you.
yeah, pretty much. So
Yeah. Now going to England was much better because they're much closer to speaking English.
yeah.
Um,
Well, they've got the original version, right? So
yeah.
everything sounds more sophisticated.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They always sound so much smarter than the rest of us.
Yeah,
Anything.
that's why all these actual plays of D&D, like everybody's trying to take on these like English accents and everything, and then you hear like such a wide gamut of like good ones and bad ones. So
So when you used to play before, um, did you guys use accents and speak in character?
no. Well,
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
didn't. We
we
really
we
didn't
might
either.
we might change the voice a little bit. Like if somebody was old, you would take a little bit of an old voice, but the whole notion of I think a lot of that came with video games as well. Like for example, World of Warcraft told us like, hey, dwarves sound Scottish or
Yeah,
something, you know? So we didn't have that back then. Video games didn't have any voices. We didn't have any actual plays or anything. So I think a lot of those voices emerged over the years so that we would do them. What's funny is in my D&D group, we kind of established that elves speak French. So like for example, if they would speak with a French accent, so it's kind of a thing that somehow emerged. So every
yeah.
time there's an elf that speaks, they try to use French words, even though none of my friends actually speak French, um, or only a little.
They
And
just use
yeah,
really insulting French accents.
yes, exactly. But it's fine. I'm cool with it. And it's funny, we're actually playing Star Wars Edge of the Empire these days. In fact, I'm GMing that tonight. And there's a lot of Twi'leks in because they're going to Ryloth. And if you watch the shows like Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars, you learn that the Twi'leks basically speak with a French accent. That's the accent they've given the Twi'leks in the Star Wars universe. So
Yeah.
one of my characters is actually playing a Twi'lek, and I told him, like, you have to do a French accent. He was like, no, don't do this to me. I can't do this. I can barely do American. So
Are they American?
yeah, they're all
Yeah.
American.
Yeah, I feel
So
the same way. One of our players played a drow, Lucky, and Lucky spoke with a French accent.
nice.
Also, probably a very insulting one. I mean, all accents are essentially
Oh, of
insulting,
course. You
unless you're,
you end up insulting someone for sure. Yes.
yeah, unless you're a linguistic expert. I am terrible at accents, so I generally just don't do them. I'll do voices sometimes, but accents are definitely not my thing. I,
Yeah.
I,
Like
I
I.
struggle with my own.
Yeah. I mean, I there's a few that I can pull off. There's others that I know I'm trying to be sensitive and not insult people. Like for example, there was one that's a little risky because it's I was playing a Tabaxi in a one shot recently, and of course, like anybody who's played Skyrim, you play a Tabaxi, you basically take the Khajiit accent from Skyrim.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, that accent is a little bit kind of like Eastern European, a little bit
yeah,
sometimes, in the way they talk. So you have to be a little bit more careful on how you say it. Let's just say I would not do this on a live play, like streamed, like in a
yeah.
private game with friends. Okay, but on an open live stream and everything, I want to be a little bit more careful about that.
Oh, it's
So,
funny, like talking to another like a streamer that I know that does. They're in the military, and then they started streaming, and like he would play with his military buddies, and they're like, "Why don't you put us on a stream?" It's like, "There's no way I'm putting you guys on a stream." and then they go and say something, well, that's blah blah blah, and there's something derogatory, and I think that's why.
That's exactly why. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've had experiences at our own tables where we've recorded the games and put them up, and me going back through the game to find things to edit out. So,
yeah. We all know how some streamers have pretty much ended their career over bad decisions, right?
So, yeah. So
it's unfortunate.
So someone was telling me about something they would do live, or they were talking about doing. Oh, they have an idea for doing this game where they get high on different drugs and then putting it up afterwards, right? And I'm like, well, I definitely wouldn't do that live.
Oh, you mean not role play? They were actually going to get high and play the game high. Oh,
yeah, God. Yeah. So they're in the state that legalized everything, so it's okay.
Still, there's a certain social responsibility with it. It's like, for example, alcohol has been legal for years, but it doesn't mean that doing a live stream drunk is any good.
Yeah,
there's a difference between what is morally correct and versus what is legal. So
I'm like, there's like 3 drugs you can do, and it's probably okay. And then after that, what are you gonna like? You can't do a stream where you're like, we're gonna shoot up heroin and then we're gonna play Dungeons and Dragons. No.
Yeah, no. This is where the very boring dad that I am,
kicks in.
Especially since when I was younger, I never experimented with any of that stuff ever. To be honest with you, so when my kids grow up and they say like, "Oh, come on, Dad," when you were young, I'm like, "Nope, I was very boring. I was a nerd. I'm still a nerd." And I was never doing any of that. While my friends were out drinking, I was playing games.
So I was like, I'm like, weed, whatever. It's not that big a deal. I mean, that's less harmful than drinking, probably.
But I wouldn't know. So that's what I hear, but honestly, I wouldn't know. So
yeah, well, I wouldn't know for a long time. So I always say the late '80s, early '90s were rough.
Let's leave it. Let's leave it at that for now.
So we were past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head out.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you want to learn more about what I'm doing, you can follow me on Twitter at ActiveNick. I also have a Twitter handle specifically for Space Kids RPG, so it's just at Space Kids RPG. So I'll be announcing it. It's going to be for sale on DriveThruRPG for those that missed the Kickstarter. Right now, the Kickstarter page, I'm not taking back the pre-orders yet, but it's going to go on backer kits soon for this. Other than that, of course, Kobold Press. Buy the books and everything. There's an awesome Kickstarter right now for the Southlands. This is the Pathfinder version, but there's an awesome Kickstarter right now running right now for the Southlands for 5th edition, the adaptation of this for 5th edition. So definitely, I highly recommend you check it out. Southlands is it's a beautiful setting. It's an extension of Midgard, basically in the south, and I highly recommend it. Other than that, there's look for Scarlet Citadel when it comes out, and even though I'm not writing for that one specifically, the supplement Midgard Magic Ley Lines is going to be offered as well on the Kobold Press site, and read the blog as well. I don't have anything upcoming right now with them. As I said, my focus is on finishing my own game, but then after that, definitely you haven't seen the last of me.
Awesome. And as always, there's links in the description, so go click away. After this is not live anymore, they'll be in the pinned comment as well. Thanks for coming on, Nick. It's been great chatting, and until next time, stay nerdy.
My pleasure.